We're here with this unruly rototiller. It's a little two-stroke motor, and it's been stored over the winter with gasoline in it, which is never a good idea. And it doesn't want to run once you take it off choke, so we need to pull the carburetor off and see if we can find out the problem. Welcome to Hack-A-Week. One nice thing about this small two-stroke stuff is it's pretty easy to work on up on a table, on a bench. So let's get the cover off here. There's the air cleaner. Not much to that. Tiny little thing. And this carburetor is basically the same carburetor found on all kinds of small two-stroke things. Weed eaters, chainsaws, etc., etc. And we're going to get in here and just do some cleaning to start out with. So I'm going to kind of work my way in from the outside in, take off this cover, which is the choke mechanism. All the choke does really is block off some of the air. And when it does that, it makes a little bit more fuel get pulled into the engine. And so then it runs richer, richer meaning more gas. Leaner, by the way, means less gas. Just like meat. Anyway, that's the fuel return line. That's a little primer pump that squirts a little bit of gas into the intake so that it'll basically prime it. So it'll get some in there to the spark plug in a hurry and fire it up. This is the fuel line where it comes in. Pull that off. And now all there is left is this small throttle cable. There's a little clip on the back, a little what's called an E-clip, and that has to come off. You have to be real careful that that doesn't go flying somewhere. They're pretty easy to lose. Just basically pry them off with a screwdriver. A smaller screwdriver would certainly help. There it is. Whoa! There was the carburetor. So there's what the E-clip looks like. See, it looks like an E. Not much to it. That's what holds on that throttle cable. So this is the entire carburetor right here. It's pretty darn simple. There's really not much there. There's two screws here. One is for the high RPM and one is for the idle. And I'm guessing that there's a bunch of dirt and crud inside here. And that's what's keeping it from pulling fuel through the way it should. So I'm just going to take this all apart, clean it all up, put it back together, and see if that does the trick. It might. If it doesn't, then we'll have to get a carburetor kit and rebuild it. Carburetor kits for these are usually available at small engine repair facilities. You can just take the entire carburetor in like this and show it to them and ask if they have a repair kit. Sometimes you can just replace the whole carburetor fairly cheap as well, but we'll just try cleaning this to start out with. Pretty simple stuff here, just a couple of screws on the bottom to take off. And there's also a couple on the top on that primer pump. A little bit of gas will probably run out all over the place. I really should have some rubber gloves on. Keep this off my hands. Now right in here, these are all the little holes and passageways where the fuel gets pulled through. I think I can get in close enough where you can see some of that crud, little particulates right there. That's not good. That could be plugging up some smaller orifices where the fuel needs to flow. So that could be a potential problem. And now on this bottom piece, there's a small thin film of a plastic-like material right here, this little thing. And believe it or not, this acts as a valve for fuel, and I'll show you what those valves are. They're really quite simple. It's just these little flaps of plastic right here. There's one right there, and there's one right there. Let's see if we can get in a little bit closer and you can see those. And those two little flaps they move a little bit like this, and they allow fuel to flow or not. And these can wear out. These things do have a lifetime. And when you buy the rebuild kit, this is pretty much one of the items you get that you replace in here. But we'll be really careful with this and clean that off. And we'll also clean off this area right here, these little passageways. There's a lot of dirt in there, so we'll get that all cleaned up. Now let's pull the top off here, the primer pump. That's just 4 Phillips screws. And there is a bit of fuel still left in this. So before I take this all the way off, I might get a rag ready and let it spill onto the rag rather than all over on the bench. Okay, there we go. So we'll clean that out too. We'll pull off this top portion. This should pop loose. It's being a bit stubborn. There it goes. We'll get inside there and clean that too. Underneath there's a little diaphragm for the pump. And then in here are some little bits where things get all cruddy. This little device right here lets the fuel flow in or not. That can get full of little pieces of dirt and screw everything up. There's a small screw that holds it in right there. So we'll take that screw out and this whole mechanism will come out. So here we go. There's that screw. We'll take that out. Set that aside. There are some really tiny little parts in here that will go a-flying if you're not careful. There's a small spring right there underneath that. And there's this piece and there's a rod. So be really careful that you don't lose any of those parts, because if you do, you will be buying a whole new carburetor. Let's take those out and lay them here on the bench very carefully. And there is the needle valve right there. That's the equivalent of a needle and seat valve on a carburetor that lets the fuel come in with a float bowl. This one, however, does it slightly different. That's it. We pretty much have taken everything out of there we can right now. We'll clean this all off with carburetor cleaner with one of those little plastic straws on the can, so we can squirt everything through with some safety glasses on, I might add. Got to protect those eyeballs. These 2 screws are the idle mixture screws. The red one is for the high RPM and the white one is for the low RPM. We need to take these out, but you can only turn them so far because they put these little plastic things on that limit how far they can turn, because they don't want you to get the mixture too lean, which would make the engine run really, really hot. So these can be pulled off with a pair of pliers. If you're a little diligent, you can pop them off. As you can see, they will come off. So we'll get the other one off. Okay, both of those have been removed, but before we just go taking these out, we want to keep track of where they are. So what we'll do is we will put a little screwdriver on there, and on the one that's the high, it is marked on the carburetor body. You can see right there, there's a little H. So let's get a screwdriver in there, and we're going to turn this screw in and count the number of turns until it bottoms out. There's 1, about 1 and a half. So about 1 3/4 it turns out. So we'll remember that. 1 3/4 turns out from the bottom of its seat. And we will do the same thing with the other screw. And then once we get those out, we can clean them off and clean inside that hole. Let's get the other one now. Alright, all the little parts are off and accounted for, and we will start cleaning now with a bit of carburetor cleaner. Wear some safety glasses so you don't get the stuff in your eyes, because if you do, it really hurts. I've done it. It's no fun at all. It really, really hurts. And it can actually damage your eye. It can damage your cornea, cause a chemical burn. Had a friend that had that happen. Underneath the car, had a whole bunch of it from a place where it had pooled up, run into his eye, and burned his cornea pretty bad. He actually had a little piece of his cornea floating around on the top of his eye. Had to go to the emergency room, wear an eye patch for about 3 or 4 days, and there's 5 layers to the cornea on a human eye. He went through 4 of them. The guy that looked at him said, "You were so lucky. 1 more layer, you'd be blind." It's amazing that it healed up okay, and he really didn't have any degradation in sight. But he's really lucky, so wear safety glasses when you do anything with chemicals. Okay, that takes care of that. We'll just keep going here and clean everything. Squirt some of this stuff through every little hole and orifice there is on this little carburetor. So I'm wearing nitrile gloves, and they work pretty well for a lot of chemistry, but this carburetor cleaner kind of swells them up a little bit. It's keeping it off my skin, but I can feel it kind of soaking through a little, so be aware of that. Latex gloves, big no-no. Just about every solvent in the world will go through latex. Let's move the camera view up here now, and I'll show you what we're going to clean next. Right up there around the place where the carburetor goes onto the engine, there's a lot of dirt and crud and stuff there. So I'm going to clean that while I'm right here. Put a little rag here to catch the solvent. Just clean off all this yuck. See, the thing with these little 2-stroke lawn equipment things and chainsaws is they're in a pretty harsh environment when you think about it. They're out there in the dirt. There's dust and dirt, and if it's a chainsaw, there's sawdust. There's all kinds of junk floating around, and they get dirty. They need maintenance. They need a little bit of love. All right. Now we'll let this stuff dry off a little and start putting everything back together. All right, reassembly time. Now when you put this fuel metering diaphragm back on, be sure that you line it up the right way. Right there, there is a tiny little channel right there that runs into this chamber, and that should line up with this little hole right here. It's very important that that's all put together right. Now this bottom section with this little valve, very important that this is all as clean as you can get it. And make sure you put all this back together the proper way. There's little alignment dowels here that will help you out. But most importantly, you want to make sure that little diaphragm, that little piece of plastic stuff, does not slip out of place. Okay, we'll get the screws back in that. Now we put our little idle mixture screws back in. Pretty sure that they are both the same. Sure looks like it. Yep, they're the same left and right. Let's put those back in. And we'll turn them both back in all the way till they just hit the bottom point, the seat. Not really tight. Don't go too tight because you'll distort the casting in the carburetor. We don't want that. Okay, those are all the way in. Now let's see, the low side was 1 1/4 turns. So there's a 1 1/4. And the high side was 1 3/4. There's 1, 1 1/2, 1 3/4. Now that's a good starting point. If this thing fires up and runs, I'll show you how to adjust those. And I am going to leave off the 2 stoppers on here. I'm not going to put those back on just yet. I may not put them back on at all. We'll see. So we'll put this back onto the engine now. Put all that back together, and we'll get it outside and see if it's going to work or if we need to get a kit. Okay, throttle is reconnected. Put the fuel line back on. Put the choke assembly and cover back on and get the mounting screws in there. Tighten those up. Air cleaner back in place. Put the cover back on. That's it. Okay, let's go see if it'll run. Cool, looks like we did the trick there. Now what we need to do is adjust those 2 screws, the one for the low, which takes care of the mixture at idle, and then the one for high, which takes care of the mixture at full throttle. That takes care of the low. Now the high is a little tricky because you need to hold the throttle on. Be careful of the spinning tines. Now you hear how it won't take the throttle? That's the low adjustment. We need to open that screw a little bit. And of course the ultimate test is to take it out in the garden and put a load on it in the dirt. Now if this was a chainsaw or a weed eater, we would do the same thing. You have to put a load on the engine to do a final adjustment. So again, the low takes care of idle and off idle, and the high takes care of the high RPMs. Under a load it may be a little different. Welcome to the garden. So, I've got a little patch of soil right here with nothing planted yet. Good place to test this out. So let's see what it'll do. Got my screwdriver handy.
going to try turning that high adjustment out just a little more. Looks like we did the trick. It seems to work okay now, much better than it was before, which was not working. So there you go, 2-stroke motors, carburetors, and how to adjust the idle mixtures low and high. Until next time.
Electric.
Those things are actually, what the hell did I get on my lens?